Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Wednesday gatherings. We are so happy every other Wednesday to gather with you twice a month, either virtually or hybrid setting, depending on the week, to have what we hope are thoughtful conversations, community building, opportunities for connection within our community as well as externally. And so we are very thrilled today to have a conversation around a project here called Abrahamic Transformations. And they're in year two of this ongoing journey that several people today will be joining us from to discuss. And we are so grateful for the conversation that is going to follow. And so just a couple notes before we launch in. There is a chat, so please use that to greet each other and to throw in thoughts and reflections and questions along the way. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat so that everyone is included in this conversation. And I think that is all that I will start us off with. I'm going to now slide sneakily to my left to share the laptop screen with my colleague, Marie Whitney, who is going to be opening us today with our opening words of gathering.
See, that's sneaky. For some reason, we have to share a computer today, and that's fine. So normally what happens in the moment of words of gathering is that we share our own personal perspectives here, understanding and embracing of all life stances, religion, and all the isms. So I would like to share a prayer. I am a recovering Catholic, and prayer is always something I have struggled with. We had an alum who wrote the prayer that I'm going to share with you, and I'm just going to change one word. Hers begins with Mother God, and I'm going to just change it to Creator. Catherine Kenyon Henderson, by the way, is our alum. Creator of the sunlight, draw us into your warmth so we can unfurl and grow. Courageous fire of good trouble, empty me of ego and self-righteousness so I can listen well and be changed. Divine spirit of tenderness, bless our desiring bodies so we might love each other better. Deep well of peace, calm my frantic mind so that I can bathe in silence. Strength of earth, awaken us to our connectedness so we might heal rather than destroy. Animating love, prepare me to give and receive so we can thrive in mutuality. Compassionate one, draw close to our suffering so we are never quite alone. And now, Kameelah, if you would begin our program. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kameelah Mu'Min Oseguera, and I am an assistant professor of psychology and Muslim studies at Chicago Theological Seminary. I'm moving into what will be my third year as a faculty member here. And I have to just say that I am truly honored and just feel a sense of deep humility to be able to do this really important work at this time with the communities that I am able to sort of build with and think with, particularly when it's difficult. So I want to first start off by thanking Rabbi Dr. Rachel Mikva for being sort of my first invitation into the CTS family, and she is here on the call. I also want to thank my co-facilitators, Rabbi Dr. Nancy Kramer and also Dr. Shea Watts for being just indescribable conversation partners, learners together. And the students who are also on the call, I see a few of you And hopefully you can share about your experience with the Abrahamic Transformation Project. It has been a labor of love and learning. And so we're really excited to share with you what we've discovered together, and also what we begin to sort of wonder about the world together. If you've joined us to, perhaps glean answers to how do you do interfaith work in a time of war, this might not be the call. What we do have are just learnings, musings, reflections, and also a lot of questions that we've thoughtfully and intentionally asked ourselves about how we do this work of community together in a really honest and authentic, open-hearted way. And I have to tell you, there are no easy answers, but we are certainly grateful for the space and the spaciousness to be able to do this in a time of urgency, right? Being able to sit with one another and think, right? And be vulnerable, and to be honest about what we're celebrating, but also as what is perhaps making our hearts ache at the same time. Last but not least, I want to thank the funder of the Abrahamic Transformations Project, who is also on the call. I'm sure he's wondering, what have you all been up to? A lot of things. So we were given just essential resources to be able to gather together through the First Analysis Institute for Integrative Studies. So Oliver Nicklin is also here, who has supported the work over the past 2 years. In this, again, very experimental way, right? We said we have some ideas about how we want to come together, and we need your support to do so. So deep gratitude to you, Oliver, for extending faith in us to be able to gather together as a community and ask each other really important questions. So with that, I want to give just a little bit of background about how we came together as the Abrahamic Transformations Project, beginning in August of 2022, and also what this year 2, beginning in November of 2023, focused on. So the Abrahamic Transformation Project is an intentional community that is built with students from Bayan Islamic Graduate School, Chicago Theological Seminary, and the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia. And our really primary focus here was to think about a way to develop not just a cohort, but really a collaborative community focused on self-discovery. How do we share about our rich traditions in a way that is able to catalyze some relationships that move beyond just sort of scripture and what we can share with one another about our sacred texts, but really thinking about when we're exploring, not just from an intellectual place, but really experientially and personally, what it means to talk about the impact of Christian hegemony and white supremacy and anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bigotry. What sort of personal stories sort of galvanize us and bring us together so that we can do this work of exploration from a place that feels personal, that feels true to the narratives that have shaped our lives. And so we began with an in-person retreat that, contrary to, I think, many multi-faith gatherings, centered around who are we, right? Yes, I'm a Muslim, Shea is a Christian, Nancy is Jewish, but how do we understand ourselves in our life paths, those milestones and those relationships that have really shaped how we come into our faith and spirituality? And so our community began with sort of creating a space for us to explore our personal stories. And so, yes, we could bring objects that represent our faith traditions, but we were really keen on really getting to know one another. And this is not a light or frivolous or surface level exploration, but in order for me to build community, in order for us to build community with one another, it requires a level of vulnerability, right, of sharing, and of empathy and listening and understanding, that we prayed and we actually saw, right, and witnessed deepen over time. And each month that we met beginning in August of 2022, if you can imagine, our community grew through sort of the tail end of the pandemic, which is not quite over. It grew through sort of world events, from everything from sort of natural disasters or events spurred by climate change, to, very personal transitions in our own lives that also spoke to who are we and who are we becoming, right, as a result of some really fundamental shifts in the world. And so as we met monthly, there was sort of topic of conversation, but also a check-in, right? How are we, right? We have close to 15 seminary students and the three of us as facilitators of this community. And we were, again, reminding ourselves often that the strength of our community is really built on knowing one another. And our sort of definitions of knowing drew from Dr. Sherry K. Watt's work on the theory of being, right? What does it mean for me to share the narrative of who I am and invite other people into sort of the path that I'm on, while also being open to witnessing and walking with others through not just our similarities, right, as members of Abrahamic faith, but our substantial differences. And we didn't want to shy away from those things that are difficult for us to navigate, but certainly important for us to discuss. And so at the conclusion of year one, our brave students in this community said, well, this is it. We need another year of being able to, begin to ask more questions of one another now that we've had almost 9 months of being able to understand who we are. So at the conclusion of year one, students expressed, again, appreciation for this opportunity to build relationships, and really to think about how we live solidarity, not just how we perform it, right? How we sort of show up for photo ops with one another, but we really started to develop bonds with one another, curiosity, but also a sense of obligation to one another as community members. So I want to lift up a small reflection from some students of the first year experience who said that being part of such a cohort requires making a constant intention to bring our whole authentic selves, an intention to carry out the goals and the guidelines, and an intention to ourselves to learn and grow. And bringing intentionality to this community, members draw closer together to themselves, to our mission, and to the divine. Our intention also reflects our commitment to bearing responsibility and to put in the required work. While we understand that this work is continuous, we leave this community with new energy, inspiration, and mechanisms to do the work that lies on and beyond the horizon. We are committed to being honest about the impact of white supremacist ideologies and theologies that have shaped our worldviews, and to actively engage in the transformation of such impact. And so when we thought about, well, what is sort of the next phase of this community? It was to deepen. It was to sit with one another and say, well, now that we feel this sense of affinity and obligation and responsibility to one another, what are other questions we can ask of each other, right? What can we start to sort of challenge ourselves with? Well, the challenge came on October 7th. Little did we know that our year two would begin with war. I was in Palestine when the war started, and about a month later was our first, again, community meeting, gathering together for year two. I didn't think I would feel so emotional. But the challenge, I think that word is an understatement. It meant that as the three of us as facilitators, Rabbi Nancy and Dr. Shea, really sat together and wondered, what do we say to our community? right? What is the statement, right? So this is maybe a week after the war started, and so much has changed since then. But at the time, I was thinking, well, what do we say, right? As a community, right? How do we share with one another the deeply painful and intense just difficulty that we already felt and that we might have anticipated would come on the horizon? So what we decided was that we would not write a statement. What we would co-create is an invitation, and essentially an invitation to our community that over these many months, almost a year of community building, of sort of strengthening our relationships, one thing we knew for certain was that we did not want our community to become a casualty of this war, which meant that we had to recommit, we had to rethink, we had to embrace uncertainty and challenge about how difficult these conversations might be. And many of us, if not all of us, have been involved in interfaith conversations. And often what we found collectively was that the conversation around Israel and Palestine was almost like the third rail. We don't talk about it. We just don't do it because of how fraught the conversations can be. So we decided again to take another approach. And that was to, and I hesitate to use this word because it's kind of overused at times, but we wanted to move towards that difficulty rather than away from it. And that was trusting in the relationships we had built over a year. It was in knowing each other's personal stories to a certain degree. It was in honoring that and being truthful with one another. That's how we continue to build those relationships. And our hope being that this experience would teach us more, would bring more humility, more curiosity, and that in being able to process through a shared pain, we would gain insight and clarity, and certainly family. So I want to invite in my co-facilitators, again, Dr. Nancy Fuchs-Kreimer and Dr. Shea to offer their reflections. I could not have done this work. I would not do this work without them. And so I think it's important to, again, share a little bit about what, what sort of, what we envisioned, and also what we discovered. Rabbi Nancy?
So thank you. It's wonderful seeing everybody. And Rachel Mikva, good to see you again after all this time. I have been doing this work for a long time. I think it's over 40 years. I've stopped counting, but I started doing it after I graduated college, and that was in 74. So it's a long time. And I've actually known Dr. Kameelah a long time too, through Philadelphia, first introduced by our mutual friend Chaz Howard at Penn, who is the chaplain there. And you were very young then, or not the very young, but you were younger. And I will say that in all the years, I'm not telling you I've worked a long time just to tell you that. I'm telling you that to tell you that this has been the hardest year of my entire career. This has been the most difficult year to be doing interfaith work. I should say that what I've done in my life is teaching at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College for many, many years, and teaching in a program called Multi-Faith Studies. So I did a lot of the work that we've just been talking about. I organized retreats with different groups of seminarians and public intellectuals. Dr. Kameelah was at some of my retreats and over the years. I've always been interested in bringing people together, and never has it been more important, and never has it been harder. So I will say that Zoom is a very challenging modality to do this work. I felt like the first year we had that grounding together in the real life, 3D as we call it, and subsequently, that first year we were kind of buoyed by that. And the second year, the combination of not having the personal retreat at the beginning. We're having our personal retreat at the end, but we didn't have it at the beginning, and the war and the disruption really, really I think, was a difficult problem. It was an obstacle. It didn't mean we quit. It didn't mean we gave up. It just meant that we had to work harder. And we had a very, very, this modality of putting people in these little boxes, and we're far away. I'm in Philadelphia. I wasn't seeing any of these people except the rabbinical students. So I can report that the 5 rabbinical students who started the program, one of them left the program and also left rabbinical school. So that we could take her out of the story for now. The other 4 really meant a lot to them. And it meant a lot to me too. And I'll just share this and then I'll stop talking, which is that I found that the way that Dr. Kameelah set up the room, even in the Zoom, allowed for a lot of vulnerability. And there was one very poignant moment where somebody who I do know in person shared things that I didn't know, something that was really going on for them that was difficult, and they were able to share it here in this space, whereas it hadn't been shared. And I called the person up right away after that session with us in the Zoom, and I encouraged them to go and talk to more people at the rabbinical school about what they were going through. They were having some hard times. And it just was powerful to me that nobody at the rabbinical school, which is in person, knew about it. So I'm going to stop talking now, but thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Nancy. Dr. Kameelah, thank you for your collegiality, your friendship, both of you. It's been an honor to do this with you. Just want to say first and foremost, I am an alum of CTS, so I got a shout out to the institution and particularly the people that gave me a wonderful place to grow and learn and do both my master's and my PhD there. So I see a couple folks on the line, Dr. Mikva, Dr. Haldeman, grateful for both of you. And like I said, it's been an honor to share this journey, not just with Dr. Oseguera and Rabbi Nancy, but with our whole cohort. It's really just a beautiful group of people. And finally, I'm grateful for the generous funding that made all of this possible. So Oliver, thank you for your generosity and open-minded, creative invitation to do something, to try something. Unlike Rabbi Nancy, I have not been doing this work for 40 years. This is very new to me, although at CTS, obviously, interreligious conversations and work are important, are part of the commitment statements of the institution. So I was a part of that through Rabbi Mikva back in the day with the eco community, and got to experience some different things that way. But this really was a new opportunity and a new challenge. So if you'll bear with me for a few minutes, I want to share a few remarks that I've written down as I journal and process and think about the last coming up, a 2-year program, as we bring this to an end, and we look back over the lessons learned, the things we didn't know, couldn't know. So as both Rabbi Nancy and Dr. Kameelah said, year 1 was really about making connections and establishing relationships. So last September, we met at Pendle Hill. It's a Quaker institution where we came together as a cohort. We broke bread, we crafted poetry, we told stories from our lives. There may have been a guest appearance by DJ Shea, who hosted some fun, a sort of untalented show. And then we also created a ritual that I thought was extremely powerful. And we created a sacred center. Each of us brought something that was sacred to us and put it in a basket and told the story. And I left that place feeling a bond between the cohort and myself. I felt connected, felt tethered together. And so year 1 was really anchored in that initial emotional connection that, like Rabbi Nancy said, you just can't recreate over Zoom, although you can do Zoom well, or you can do Zoom not so well. I think we've done the best we can monthly. So I really look forward to the sort of capstone gathering as we bookend our 2-year project together. I think if I were to if I were to give a theme for year 2, I think it would be the power in showing up and doing maintenance with our relationships. I think the ties that bind us together were and are challenged by what's going on in the world. And so that began to be part of our conversation. And that was right before October 7th happened. And as Dr. Kameelah said, we started in November. So all of a sudden, year 2 felt not just necessary, but urgently so. And I think we kind of there was no manual for this. There's no instruction book. There's no model really. And so I was surprised and found real beauty in saying to each other, hey, what would it look like to put these traditional deliverables on hold, and let's just pump the brakes and slow down these ever grinding wheels of production that are just everywhere in the academy. And let's focus instead on doing some soul care. And I'll be the first to concede to you that learning from the past is really, really important. And it can also be a seductive distraction that pulls us out of the grief, the violence, and pain of our current moment. In that way, I'm very much informed by Donna Haraway, this great sort of ecofeminist scholar, and she writes about staying with the trouble. And for her, that's resisting the urge to live either in the past, in some Edenic past, or looking with your head in the clouds towards some salvific future. And so I think what makes Haraway's work particularly pertinent for us is that it's grounded in the inevitable and unresolvable, like, disaster. The thing is, we can't go back, and we can't fast forward or microwave this, but rather we have to stay with the trouble and hope that that with staying with the trouble, we'll find plenty of it, A, but B, that we'll be able to create something more just, more sustainable, etc. So together, I thought that the three of us, the facilitators, came together and we chose, all right, we're going to focus intentionally on relationship. And it wasn't easy. It hasn't always been easy, particularly in a digital format. Emailing back and forth, text groups, WhatsApp, Zoom, the digital fatigue that I think can settle in on top of what's going on in the world. So I had a theory, and now I am convinced that relationships should precede the work that we do with people, especially people across a wide spectrum of belief and identity, commitments, all of that. And so when it doesn't, it looks like the cringy photo op, the drive-by activism, the performative, solidarity, all of that. And to be honest, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So for me, I think year 2 has really been about maintaining those relationships, and in the face of helplessness, when it would be so easy to shrink back, to show up. The power of showing up, and acknowledging it's much harder to make friends with the nuance. It's a struggle. And even now, like I struggle to find the words that could adequately express or articulate it. And that's because language always fails us. As I've put together my journal, I stare at the blinking icon of the Word document, just taunting me for something to say, desperate for anything to say to make it go away, to make it make sense, and then to type my rage with furious fingers in 12-point font, Chicago style, by the way. So as we close year 2, I really do look forward to gathering in June. I think there's a space and a time there that is necessary and urgent, as I said earlier, so that we can carve out that space together and to love and be loved, to speak and be heard, to ask questions, to smile, to laugh, to cry, to break bread again together. And one final thing I'll say is I think I'm grateful in the way that the work has been framed and scoped and sequenced, because I don't think any of us thought we were going to come out of this with some model of interreligious work that you can just bottle and sell to people. And in the showing up, in the caring, in the noticing, I think we have discovered a connection that, if we let it, can make us stronger. And I think that will go much further than anything we could fabricate or deliver with this sort of capitalistic mindset. And so with that, maybe we can witness other possibilities. Maybe we can create other possibilities that show something better. The best critique of the bad is practice of something better, is something constructive. And so hopefully those practices can bring about a more healing, a more just, and a more peaceful future, if we'll stay with the trouble.
Thank you so much, Shea, for that. And certainly, I think what you can all glean is that we were each bringing our sort of perspective and what has grounded us in the work, and also staying open to what the students in this community also had to teach us. And that required, as facilitators, also being transparent, right, as possible, and saying, in our invitation to this year two, what we co-wrote began with transparency, right? In full transparency, we must share with you all that over the course of the last several days, the three of us, Rabbi Nancy, Dr. Kameelah, and Dr. Shea, have struggled with how to speak with one another, how to navigate our different positionalities, experiences, and worldviews. Where we eventually felt strength and alignment was in affirming that we are here to, quote, create circles, not lines, and that's from Black Space Manifesto, and to be humble learners who practice deep listening. We return to the spirit with which we began this Abrahamic transformation journey, and that is to nurture authentic relationships with one another and acknowledge the complexities which shape our lives. And I would also add the beauty which shape our lives, right? Our initial prompt and in that in-person retreat in August of 2022 was, what brings you joy, right? We didn't say, well, bring, the favorite verse from your sacred text, right? But we suspected that what brought us joy was grounded in faith and family and community. And it was absolutely true. So in the spirit of sort of not writing statements, what we offered was an invitation. We said, we invite you to reflect on what brings you solace in this moment of darkness. We invite you to acknowledge what is fearful and terrifying in this moment. We invite you to reflect on what you are praying for as violence escalates. How might we join with one another as compassionate witnesses to each other's stories and perspectives? And how might we model here in this community that which we are longing for in the world? And so this is, of course, what we endeavored to do, and as facilitators, leaving so much room open to collaborate and to co-create what this community could be with our students. So there are a number of them here, and I want to invite them to share about their experience over the last 2 years. It is certainly one that has changed me, just full stop. It has changed me. And as Dr. Shea said, pushed me to show up even when I didn't want to, when I thought it was really, really hard. Again, we were committed to each other and for this community to thrive, right, in the face of that war. So I want to invite PhD students at CTS, Aisha Subhan, Bayan alum, Tarek Abdul Haq is also on the line. Recent graduate, Shari Campbell, welcome. And there are a few others I can't see at the moment. Let me scroll. Basma Salam, who is also a recent graduate and spoke at commencement a couple of weeks ago, along with Shari. Did I get all of you? Sadia Ahmed is also a member of our ATP community. And so if you would like to share a few words, you are more than welcome. Let me make sure I didn't miss any of my friends. Okay. So I would, I guess I'll start with to my right on my screen with Aisha. If you could just share a little bit about what brought you to ATP and also what you experienced and learned.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our facilitators and my peers in this cohort. This has really been a special experience. What brought me to this cohort was, I think, how original and refreshing this interfaith work sounded to me. I never heard of an interfaith group that wanted to tackle Christian hegemony and white supremacy. It's always more of like the frills and you know how the kumbaya sort of right language that we come to these interfaith gatherings sometimes. So that was really refreshing to me that we could possibly do really powerful work together, which I think is the potential that interreligious engagement really has. So that's what brought me to the cohort. And I have been just in awe of how well the model that we created works. Dr. Mikva put this lovely quote in the chat from Jennifer Bailey about relationships at the speed of trust. And I think we really did that. We had this acronym that we created in our first year of the program, FAITH, foundations, aspirations, intentions, transformations, and horizons. And I think it really took that form. We leaned into who we are, our foundations, and that came to ground us collectively. We came with aspirations and hopes. And you need that, right, in such a group and to have transformation. But we also brought intentionality, and we had a deep commitment to each other, to what we've created, and to the goals that we wanted to achieve. And transformations, I think that's in the cohort's name. But we really did that too. And I see that happening because love was really at the forefront. Love, we came with this notion that love was kind of going to be our guide and our ethic. And I think love is what inspires transformation too. So it was love as responsibility, love as accountability, and also horizons, that we were also committed to the future. And that came to help us in the next year. Which I think we really needed something like this. And I think we couldn't have done it without the relationships that we created and those firm foundations. And for me, this last year has been a beautiful place for healing. I think that the facilitators very much so modeled vulnerability, accountability, and what it means to be introspective. And they admittedly said that they were learning alongside us. And that vulnerability, I think, was so crucial. And we could just come as we are and be vulnerable too. And it did end up being a place where we could express grief. And I think I think a lot of the cohort members really needed a space like this at a time when, I think in a time of war, right, we often turn away from each other. But we leaned into problems, and with that, we leaned on each other. And I think in that way, grief was a portal for repair. And I do see that will continually be a theme for us. And that's my hope with our in-person gathering this year. And yeah, more healing together. But I thank all of you for being a part of this journey.
Thank you, Aisha. Yes, so much learning, so much of also embracing what we don't know and being able to name that we don't know. This is not a time any of us have ever experienced. And so being honest about what we're challenged with, but as you said, leaning on each other and leaning into the problems was certainly a helpful sort of framing for us. Shari, you're a recent graduate, like 2 weeks fresh off the, the commencement stage. So I am also want to invite you to share. And again, just to remind folks, this was a group of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish students. And so having that kind of diversity, not just religiously, but of folks from all different sort of experiences and backgrounds also deeply enriched us. So Shari, if you'd like to sort of share about what brought you to ATP and also essentially what kept you and what you learned and discovered.
Oh, thank you. It's so wonderful to see everyone again. Um, the group, as Aisha said, was very interesting to me. And I thought I would just toss my name in the hat to apply because of the topic. And really wanting to see how we really were going to try to tackle Christian hegemony and white supremacy in such a group. And I think the in-person meeting, like so many people said, really helped us build a foundation of trust and vulnerability. And with love as our core, we were able to begin to create great, wonderful relationships. And it just has affirmed to me the power of relationships and being able to get through the hard things when you have solid relationships with people of other faiths, other cultures. And I would, recommend that you all do this again with another cohort of students because it really expanded my thought process. It gave me new perspectives on very many different topics. And where I thought that I was empathetic, I have learned that I had spaces to grow. And that is always important to learn what you don't know so that you can start working on that. So I just appreciate my time in the cohort, and all the facilitators were absolutely wonderful, and continued blessings on this work.
Thank you, Shari. And, it's been such, I guess the journey has been one that it sounds like we're all still trying to put words to. And I want to lift up that when we talk about love and showing up, it is a very rigorous, right, exhausting, demanding kind of love and showing up. It is one that tested us. And it was, in the sharing of stories. And it was actually one of our rabbinical students who suggested that we do sort of this narrative timeline activity, which essentially centered, right, how do we all enter, right, into this conversation around Israel and Palestine, and what has impacted our phases of growth and learning around what's happening. And that carried us from November all the way to April. And so when we talk about the speed of trust and slowing things down and building relationships and discovering who we are, it is centering that as the work, right? Not as sort of a beautiful aside, but really the core of what we're striving to do, so that once we know one another and we're able to see each other's like humanity and vulnerability and areas of growth and still love, right? And still show up. This is, something like, sort of the Olympic trials of doing interfaith work. I mean, it is not for the faint of heart. It is for people who are strong-hearted and open-hearted, and certainly pushed us to just reassess, right, what we thought we knew, what we thought our capacities were, and each time we show up with more questions and more authenticity, more honesty, we are able, right, to say, I don't know, but I know that I need to be here, right? And I'm open to what this place, this here, teaches me. Before we open up the floor to just any questions that folks might have for us, would any of my other friends like to share? Brother Tariq, Abdul Haq, Basma, Sadia, would you like to share a little bit about what brought you to the program and also what you learned and discovered? If you can, raise your hand.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon everyone here. I had the blessing of seeing Shari for the first time since the Quaker retreat that we had at graduation. So congratulations to you. Congratulations to me. Anyway, so one of the things when I read about the flyer for the Abrahamic Transformations was that I noticed that they were only taking 5 Jews, 5 Christians, and 5 Muslims. And that stood out to me because, like I think Aisha said, I didn't want to do like a kumbaya interfaith thing. Like, I live in Houston, and it's like alhamdulillah, we have tons of diversity here. I've done so much interfaith activities and things like that, and we're always kind of jiving in those. But it's like we don't like go deeper. We don't go deeper than that. It's always like kind of like, oh, we have so much in common, stuff like that. But we do, and it's great. But we didn't go deeper, and so I kind of joined this cohort. I was very happy to be accepted, and I was also a little apprehensive. I was like, man, what is this going to be like exactly? And showed up at this Quaker retreat place, and I was like, I've never been at a Quaker place, and it was beautiful. It was an amazing experience. And when we introduced ourselves and everything, we didn't sit there and just talk about our religions, but more like our experiences in being Muslim and our experiences in being Christian and Jewish and so forth. And obviously there were some different denominations involved too. But then there was also like the differences in terms of, race. Like me being Muslim as a female who wears a scarf is different from Brother Tariq, who's Black and lives in Georgia, Atlanta, and all those things. Like we all have very different experiences, and then obviously then with different faith traditions. And so I got to understand a lot more about those things. Like, it's not like I wouldn't have known otherwise, but it's like we were very focused on these things. We were really focused on like how these like differences actually play together. And one thing I learned was that we were all carrying a lot of pain for different reasons. It is not easy. I don't think historically it's ever been easy to follow one faith or another and not ever experience discrimination and such. And then there's racial discrimination and so on and so forth. And it was so beautiful to be able to relate in pain and be able to provide one another with not just like consolation, but also like a strength in what we were all going through. I was quite upset by the end of the year because I felt like we did so much together, and I was like, now what? Like, what do we do now? And like everyone was from all across the country. It's not like we're in the same city and we can like get together and like have coffee and stuff. So in one of our last sessions, I was actually talking to one of my Jewish peers, and I was saying to him, like, I have been in other interfaith spaces where, the Jews and the Muslims are like, we should talk about Israel and Palestine. And it's like, no, because we're not in a place together where we can tackle something like that, because that is huge and is very emotional, and there's so much going on with it. And I was like, no. So that I've been in those spaces, and then I was sitting there with my Jewish peer, and I was like, look, for the first time, I feel like I'm in a space where if we started to talk about a little bit of it, I think we could actually have a very productive conversation. Little did I know, October 7th happened. And then the next thing I know is we get a text message and everything and an email from Dr. Oseguera and, you know, Rabbi Nancy and Shea Butter and everyone. And they were like, hey, let's, do you guys want to put this cohort back together and let's tackle this? And I was so impressed, and I felt very blessed to be in that situation where, and I was scared. I was like nervous. I was like, you guys are just kind of throwing like a, you know, I was like, I got no idea what's going to happen. We got together in like, I think it was October, November. And I was just like holding on to my chair. And I was like, what's going to happen in this conversation? And fortunately, you know, we had a beautiful conversation. I mean, extremely painful, but also beautiful. And I apologize for keep going. Just one last thing, you know, recently in one of these meetings, one of my Jewish peers started to cry because of the pain that they were facing from their other Jewish peers who, you know, basically this peer saying that, you know, they want ceasefire, etc., and then everyone else around them being like, what's wrong with you? There's you know, we shouldn't have a ceasefire, etc. And the fact that they sat in this space with all of us and cried, I was like, I never thought I would experience that, like a Jewish peer crying because they want to cease fire and the rest of their peers going against that and what that made them feel. So I mean, it's been wild, and I don't want it to end. Hint, hint. But yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Basma. Rabbi Nancy, it looked like.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
There was something I wanted to say at the end. I wasn't sure how much time to take up. For me, if you want to I put my eye on the prize. The most important thing right now is looking at November and looking at the fragility of our democracy. And one of the things that I want to just bring up is that I've been reading Timothy Snyder, the Yale historian who writes about the 20s and 30s in Germany and how fragile their democracy turned out to be. And the relationships we're building is one of the bulwarks against losing our country, because power wants us apart. And I just, every morning I wake up and think that every single time I make a connection, like with Basma or anybody across difference, as we are doing here, we are building a web of connections that will make it harder for somebody to take us apart and put wedges between our communities and then take over the freedoms that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rabbi Nancy. We do have a question, or several questions in the chat. Maybe Dr. Shea, you want to take a look, but from Nora Zaki, when do we say no to bridge building within interfaith? Did you all discuss if interfaith work can be used as a form of soft politics to normalize oppression? I'll just sort of share out those two questions. And I have a lot of thoughts. Again, an hour is it's many ways insufficient to really share in detail just how much consideration, right, these conversations required of us. And also how protective we were of the space as well. So we were not on the front page of any newspaper. We did not want to sort of promote ourselves as like the ideal model for how you maintain interfaith relationships through war and crisis. Our priorities were each other, caring for each other, learning from each other, and certainly being able to discover, again, what could be, right, rather than what typically is. So Dr. Shea, if there are any other thoughts you'd like to add to those questions.
Yeah, it's a really two good questions, Nora. I'll just say briefly, I think the answer, I mean, there are lots of answers, right? But I think when I read your first question, when do we say no to bridge building within interfaith? I think the moment that you can no longer sort of bring yourself, bring your tradition. You're asked to violate principle. You're put in a difficult predicament. I think that's the moment that it becomes a no for anyone. We all have our boundaries and things we're willing to compromise and things we're not willing to compromise. And so I think if we're asked to compromise something that is a non-negotiable for us, that would start, that would be a no. The second thing I'll say is I'll just reframe your question. Did you all discuss if interfaith work can be used as a form of soft politics to normalize oppression? We did, but it wasn't so much if. I think the question is, what do we say when interfaith work can be used as a form of soft politics to normalize oppression? And so I think recontextualizing that question and realizing it's inevitable, as I talked about performative activism and solidarity and things like that, it happens. And so I think the question is, what do we do when we recognize, how can we call it out? Do we have enough trust built in a relationship to have those sorts of conversations that will be painful, but that's part and parcel of the work, I think.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we have to sort of close our time here for Wednesday gathering. Oliver had a question.
And one thing that I have to answer to my board, that I would like if you're going to have this June retreat, how this the wonderful growth that you've all experienced, how that could be shared on a broader basis. I know you're not trying to set up some formal, rigid model as to how you deal with interfaith issues, but you've had a wonderful experience, and you're all ministerial students, seminarians, and you'll be teaching and educating in your role as ministers for the rest of your life. How do we kind of embody what you learned and expand the footprint?
Yeah.
But I know that's not the purpose of the group. But you had this wonderful experience. Somehow we need to extend it beyond. So if you could give feedback to me to take to my board, it would be helpful after your June retreat.
Absolutely. Part of our sort of reconvening in person is to talk about what have we learned, right? I mean, through the thick of it, it's hard to kind of download some of those insights and wisdom that we've gained with each other. But what we're hoping is that in being able to gather together, give each other some hugs, right? We've been virtual for so long, is to, again, share with others, right, who are striving to imagine the world in different ways, right? What we've discovered, right? And that is, again, reinforcing the point of the centering of meaningful relationship building, especially when it's difficult, right? What does it mean to return to the idea of staying with the trouble, staying with love, staying with honesty? And again, I cannot emphasize enough how rigorous this is as a practice. And so I think there's a lot for us to sort of share out with the world. And we want to come together again as a community to compile some of our individual musings around what we've learned, and to flesh out some of those themes around what's important for people to know and also to support. I mean, again, thankfully, through your generosity, we had the spaciousness to really focus on relationships and being able to, in the future, prioritize that as work, right? As very strenuous work. And that what it yields, I believe it's something that is so worthwhile. It's invaluable. And we've already seen the ways that what we've done here has been seeded, right, or planted in other communities, other programs that were led by Aisha Supan and Becca Blackburn, who were members of the ATP community. They led themselves as facilitators. Another community that benefited from the insights that we've gained here. So there is so much for us to share with you, Oliver, and with the world, and we're eager to do so.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on relationship is the key. that I've seen with the other programs we sponsored. Well,
Absolutely.
I'll look forward to hearing the feedback and pray that it's a wonderful June retreat.
Oh, thank you so much. Deep gratitude. So we do have to close out. Thank you for giving us 2 extra minutes of your time this afternoon. I wondered, Rabbi Nancy, if you could close our gathering for today, offering you sort of the last word as our elder in this work. It was 40 years of experience.
I guess what I would say, not as an elder, but as a Jew, is that we have a blessing for our teachers. And we say for our teachers, for all who study Torah, for all who study goodness and wisdom, may there be peace, may there be blessing, may there be joy, may there be serenity, may there be good times and abundant, abundant blessing and peace for all who have taught, who have listened, who have learned. And may we say, Amen.
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 Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum.